After I unexpectedly saved my first love, the drowning billionaire heiress Chloe Sullivan, her father, Robert Sullivan, gave me two options. The first was to walk away with a $10 million check. The second was to marry his stunning daughter. Without a moment's hesitation, I chose the $10 million, booked a flight out of Aspen for the following week, and set off to chase the life I truly wanted. I did this because in my past life, I had torn that same check to pieces and chosen to marry Chloe, only to be met with a contemptuous sneer from Robert Sullivan and an ever frostier gaze from Chloe herself. For the 10 years of our marriage, I lived like dirt, a shadow desperately chasing her silhouette. It all ended at a corporate gala, where I was stabbed to death in a dark alley by her frenemy while trying to protect her. As I lay dying, the last thing I saw was her completely impassive face, as if I were nothing more than a stranger. This time around, I refused to be the groveling lapdog who ends up with nothing. So, I calmly extended my hand and accepted the check. I looked up at Robert Sullivan, a brilliant, almost grateful smile spreading across my face. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed like a thunderclap in the lavish private dining room. The entire speech Robert Sullivan had prepared died in his throat, the stern authority on his face instantly replaced by sheer astonishment. He had probably imagined 100 ways I might refuse, but he never in a million years expected me to thank him with a smile. Next to them, the mocking smirk on the face of Chloe's childhood friend, Brad Thompson, froze solid, like a duck suddenly being strangled. And then there was Chloe, the untouchable ice queen who never betrayed an emotion. For the first time, a crack appeared in her perpetually frozen facade. Her pupils constricted slightly and her lips parted, but no sound came out. I carefully folded the check and tucked it into the pocket of my faded jeans, then stood and bowed to Robert Sullivan. "Mr. Sullivan, you have my word. From this day forward, I will never bother Ms. Sullivan again." With that, I turned to Chloe. "I'm sorry for having been a nuisance these past 3 years. I wish you a bright future and a smooth journey ahead." Chloe's body gave an almost imperceptible shudder. She finally, truly looked at me, her beautiful eyes no longer filled with ice, but with a profound, undeniable shock. Before she could say a word, I turned to go. Just then, Brad Thompson's voice cut through the silence. "Ethan, and here I thought you had some integrity. Turns out you're just another spineless gold digger, selling a decade of devotion for $10 million? You're pathetic." I stopped in my tracks. In my past life, those words had sent me into a blind rage. I'd lunged at him, only to be beaten to a pulp by his bodyguards and thrown out in disgrace. But now I just turned back calmly, my eyes holding not anger, but a quiet pity. "You're mistaken, Brad. First, it wasn't 10 years, it was 3. Second, it wasn't a relationship, it was my one-sided pursuit. This isn't selling out. It's Mr. Sullivan's reasonable compensation for my efforts over the past 3 years. After all, playing the part of a competent lapdog takes time and energy. $10 million is neither too much nor too little. It's the perfect amount." I pulled open the heavy wooden door and walked out without a backward glance, leaving a dead silence in my wake. Outside the hotel, the bright summer sun made my eyes water. I pulled out the check, the string of zeros so real it brought tears to my eyes. To hell with love. To hell with dignity. I, Ethan, have been given a second chance, and this time, I'm not loving anyone but money. I didn't head straight for the bank. An old fox like Robert Sullivan would likely pull a stunt, maybe putting a hold on the check or writing a bad one just to watch me make a fool of myself. A clever move, Mr. Sullivan. I hailed a cab back to my rented room in a rundown part of town. It was a dark, damp space, less than 100 square feet, the air thick with the smell of instant noodles and mildew. This was the love nest I'd endured for 3 years just to be near Chloe's university. I opened my old laptop, a 5-year-old machine whose screen flickered and lagged before finally coming to life. I didn't rush to do anything. I just leaned back in my chair and let myself dream about the future. What was my greatest asset now that I had a second chance? It was my knowledge of the next decade's economic trends. I knew exactly which stocks would skyrocket and which industries would boom. I opened my trading app and expertly typed in a ticker, Ascend Tech. I remembered it perfectly. Tomorrow, this obscure little company was going to announce a revolutionary chip patent, and its stock would explode from $5 a share to $200. I picked up my phone and dialed Chloe's number. "I've boxed up everything you left at my place and put it outside the door. You can send someone to get it whenever. Also, I'm changing my number, so there's no need to contact me again." I hung up before she could reply, then popped out my SIM card, snapped it in two, and tossed it in the bin. The world was finally quiet. The next morning, I went straight to the bank. To my surprise, the check cleared without a hitch. It wasn't until the text alert lit up my phone, confirming the long string of zeros in my account, that I truly believed my life was getting a reboot. Without a second thought, I transferred $9,900,000 into my brokerage account and bought as much Ascend tech stock as I could. Walking out of the brokerage firm, a wave of relief washed over me. Now all I had to do was wait. I didn't go back to that moldy apartment. Instead, I went to the finest hotel downtown and checked into an executive suite. Soaking in the tub, sipping chilled champagne, and gazing out at the glittering Aspen skyline, it all felt surreal. In my previous life, I could only stand on the street below a place like this, staring up at the penthouse lights, imagining Chloe at some lavish party inside. Just as my mind was wandering, my phone chimed. It was an iMessage from an unknown number, but I knew it was Chloe. "Ethan, where are you? Did you throw away all the things I gave you?" She must have gone to some trouble to get my new number. The gifts she'd given me were just trinkets she no longer wanted. A pen here, a notebook there, handed over with the same air one might give spare change to a beggar. I was such a fool back then, treating them like treasure. I didn't reply. I just blocked the number. Then I called room service. "Hello, I'd like to schedule 2 professional massage therapists. This life, I was going to treat myself right. For the next week, I lived the life I had only ever dreamed of. I woke up whenever I wanted, had exquisite breakfasts at the rooftop restaurant, killed afternoons at the gym or the pool, and spent my nights exploring Aspen's most exclusive clubs. I traded my cheap t-shirts and jeans for a tailored suit. It's true what they say, clothes really do make the man. Dressed in fine tailoring with a Patek Philippe on my wrist, I walked into high-end establishments and was met only with deferential smiles and impeccable service. No longer the judgmental or disdainful stares I was used to. Money, it turned out, was the ultimate source of a man's confidence. As for the Ascend tech stock, I didn't even bother checking it. That night, I was at the Summit, Aspen's most exclusive private club, drinking with a pair of stunning models I'd invited out. The music was deafening, shadows danced, and the air was thick with the scent of money and lust. In my past life, I wouldn't have even been allowed through the door. Now, I was sitting in the best booth in the house, the center of attention. "Ethan, have another drink," the model beside me purred, pressing closer. I smiled and playfully squeezed her cheek, but before I could reply, I saw a familiar figure out of the corner of my eye. Chloe. What was she doing here? She was with Brad Thompson and a few other rich kids I didn't recognize. Brad was loudly boasting about something, while Chloe stood there, a cool and distant island in a sea of noise. She saw me too. The moment our eyes met, I saw a flicker of surprise, then confusion, and finally, disgust. Yes, disgust. In her mind, a guy who took her father's money and blew it on women and booze was no better than garbage. Brad followed her gaze, and an exaggerated sneer spread across his face. He pushed through the crowd and swaggered over to my table. Well, if it isn't the one and only Ethan, our great romantic hero." Brad was loud, intentionally drawing the attention of everyone around us. "What's this? Spending the 10 million Mr. Sullivan gave you to party? You must feel like you're on top of the world, huh?" His friends behind him snickered, muttering insults about me being a pathetic simp who sold his soul for a paycheck, a disgrace to men everywhere. The models beside me looked uncomfortable and started to get up, but I gently placed a hand on their arms, signaling them to stay put. I lifted my glass, slowly swirling the whiskey inside, not even bothering to look at Brad. "Brad, long time no see. How's the family business? I heard Thompson Industries ran into some problems with a few of its overseas projects." "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped. I took a sip of my whiskey. "That port project in Southeast Asia, it fell through because of a sudden policy change, didn't it? And your European semiconductor contract, didn't Sterling Capital swoop in and steal it? Between those two, you must be down at least $500 million. I knew all of this from financial news reports in my past life. At my words, beads of cold sweat formed on Brad's forehead. These were corporate secrets known only to the board of directors. How could this nobody possibly know? You've been investigating me? I set down my glass and finally met his gaze. "Brad, you give yourself way too much credit. You're not worth my time." I stood up, a good half-foot taller than him, and looked down with an expression of pure contempt. "Why don't you worry about your own sinking ship instead of running around like a rabid dog, barking at everyone you meet?" The laughter around us died down as everyone sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Brad was completely intimidated, his mouth hanging open, unable to utter a single word. His face was a blotchy mess of red and white. I paid him no more mind, pulling a thick wad of cash from my wallet and leaving it on the table. "Thanks for the company, ladies. This should cover your ride home." Then, I straightened my tie and walked right past Brad. I paused for a fraction of a second as I passed Chloe. She was staring at me, the shock in her eyes even more profound than it had been in the restaurant. She couldn't comprehend how the pathetic boy who had groveled at her feet just days ago had suddenly become this sharp, unfamiliar man. I shot her a knowing smirk. "Chloe, you really need to work on your judgment of character." And with that, I walked away, leaving her and a room full of stunned faces in my wake. It wasn't that you were ever out of my league. It's just that now I can't be bothered to look up. I left the club, but instead of going back to the hotel, I drove straight to the airport. Aspen held too many painful memories from my past life. Now that I had my seed money, it was time to start fresh somewhere new. The red-eye took off for New York City, the international metropolis where the streets were paved with gold and opportunity. On the plane, I switched off my phone, settled into the plush first-class seat, and fell into a deep sleep. When I opened my eyes again, we were landing at JFK. Stepping out of the airport and breathing in the humid New York air, I felt like a completely new man. I didn't rush to buy property. Instead, I took out a long-term lease on a penthouse suite at a luxury residence overlooking the Hudson. Standing before the panoramic, floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing down at the glittering Manhattan skyline, I knew this was where I truly belonged. The moment the market opened the next day, my broker called, his voice trembling with excitement. "Mr. Ethan, it's soaring." Ascend Tech hit the circuit breaker. "Limit up." I just calmly grunted in acknowledgement. "Hold. Don't sell a single share until it hits 150. After hanging up, I began to plan my next move. Stock trading was just quick cash, not a solid foundation. I was going to build an empire. Using my knowledge of the future, I knew that telehealth, electric vehicles, and artificial intelligence would be the next 3 gold rushes. I spent a week drafting a detailed business plan. I would launch a venture capital firm to invest in promising startups in these exact sectors. A month later, just as I'd predicted, Ascend Tech stock price hit $150 a share. My initial investment of nearly $10 million had ballooned into a figure that staggered even me, $300 million. I cashed out immediately, securing my profits. With that capital, my firm, Apex Capital, was officially born in New York City. I leased the top floor of a skyscraper in the financial district with a commanding view of the entire city. I started recruiting, offering salaries well above the industry average to poach the sharpest analysts and traders from Wall Street's biggest firms. At first, these seasoned professionals were skeptical of a kid in his early 20s being their boss. But after I accurately predicted 3 market crashes and led them in a series of short sells that netted us $50 million in a single day, they all shut their mouths. Their looks of doubt turned to respect, and then to something bordering on fanatical reverence. In their eyes, I wasn't just their boss. I was a financial deity. My life became a whirlwind of endless meetings, reports, and appointments. I gradually forgot about Aspen, about Chloe, and about the humiliating past I'd left behind. Then one day, my assistant handed me an invitation. "Mr. Ethan, there's a major international business summit at the Javits Center next week. The organizers sent this over personally." I took it and glanced over it. My fingers paused when I saw the list of co-sponsors. Sullivan Corporation. Some ghosts just refused to stay buried. "Decline it," I said. My assistant hesitated. "Sir, this is a huge event. Nearly half the Fortune 500 will be represented. And the host, Mr. Sterling, specifically asked for you to attend." Mr. Sterling, the son of a London-based tycoon and the summit's host. I frowned. In my past life, I'd only ever seen him in the news. Now he was requesting a meeting. It seemed the reputation of Apex Capital was spreading beyond New York. "Fine, I'll go. I'm curious to see the look on the Sullivans' faces when they see me again." Besides, I had a special surprise prepared for them. A week later, I was on a private jet to the conference. I hadn't expected that the moment I walked into the main hall, Brad Thompson would come storming toward me. "Ethan, what the hell did you do?" I stood under a massive crystal chandelier, feeling the weight of 100 curious stares. Brad grabbed the lapels of my suit like a desperate gambler who'd lost his last chip. His breathing was ragged, and his hands were shaking. He must have just gotten the news that the Thompson Industries port project had officially been terminated. "Ethan, what did you do?" I glanced down at his trembling hands. Just a few weeks ago, he was the arrogant heir to a fortune. Now, he was just a pathetic clown. I felt no anger, only the calm of someone who sees the whole board. "Brad, this is a very expensive suit. I'm not sure you can afford to replace it anymore." I gripped his wrist and applied the slightest pressure. He yelped in pain and let go. I calmly smoothed the lapels of my suit. This feeling of complete control was infinitely better than the desperate groveling of my past life. "Apex Capital, where did you get that kind of money? How could you possibly know our company's secrets?" You can thank Mr. Sullivan for the $10 million seed money. It helped me get in on the ground floor of Ascend Tech. Brad froze, his face ashen. He could never have imagined that the money used to humiliate me would become the very shovel that dug his family's grave. Just then, Chloe emerged from the crowd in a white dress, her eyes wide with shock. "Ethan, did you have to be so ruthless?" she asked. I turned to face her. I had loved that face for a decade, but now, looking at it, I felt not a single ripple of emotion. "Miss Sullivan, all's fair in love and business. You didn't seem to think Brad was being ruthless when he was trying to destroy me." Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came out. I ignored them both and walked past, heading for the VIP section at the far end of the hall as everyone watched. "Stop your pathetic barking," I said over my shoulder. "You're not even in my league anymore." I approached Mr. Sterling and we lightly touched our glasses together. Brad collapsed onto the floor, swallowed by a sea of whispers and stares. In the private lounge, the only sound was the clinking of ice in a glass. Mr. Sterling sat across from me, his eyes filled with genuine admiration. Our talk went exceedingly well. Apex Capital would be partnering with his family's conglomerate on a new green energy venture. I knew this deal would solidify my position in the market. "Ethan, my friend, you're a force to be reckoned with. The way you dismantled the Thompsons' portfolio was surgical." "I just capitalized on an opportunity, Mr. Sterling. You're too kind." After Mr. Sterling left, I was preparing to leave myself when the door opened. It was Chloe. The icy composure she'd worn in the main hall was gone, replaced by a look of exhaustion and regret I'd never seen on her face before. "Ethan, can we talk? Not about business. Just talk." I sat back down and poured myself a glass of water. In my past life, that tone of voice would have made my heart ache for her. Now, it just felt like a waste of my time. "Ms. Sullivan, I have an international conference call this afternoon. You have 3 minutes. "You never used to call me that," she whispered. "The $10 million, my father was just testing you. He never meant for you to actually leave." I almost laughed out loud. "A test? Shoving a check in my face and having security throw me out on the street, that's what you call a test? If that's all the nonsense you came here to say, you can go. In fact, Miss Sullivan, I should be thanking you for that $10 million. It taught me that self-respect is worth a hell of a lot more than love." Chloe stood frozen, tears glistening in her eyes. I stood, picked up my jacket, and walked right past her. I didn't look back, didn't even give her a sideways glance. "Miss Sullivan, let's not speak of personal matters again. From now on, our relationship is strictly business." I stepped out of the lounge and into the warm sunlight. I realized that in letting go of my obsession, even the air felt cleaner. 3 days after returning to New York, I got a call from Robert Sullivan. His voice had lost its commanding tone. Now it was laced with a poorly disguised panic. I sat in my top-floor office at Apex Capital, looking out over the city, and put him on speaker. "Ethan, what is your game? You destroyed the Thompsons deal, and now you're launching a hostile takeover of Sullivan Corp. Mr. Sullivan, you're the one who taught me that business is all about profit. I see value in your company's stock. Is that a problem?" I heard the sound of glass shattering on the other end of the line. The great Robert Sullivan was clearly losing his composure. In my past life, he saw me as less than nothing, a failure who would never make it. Now, I held his entire legacy in the palm of my hand. "This is revenge. You're doing this to destroy my family because of Chloe. You give your daughter too much credit. Revenge? No, this is just good business." I hung up the phone and blocked his number. Watching the stock ticker on my screen, I felt perfectly calm. Sullivan Corp was a house of cards, all shiny facade and rotten foundations. His books had been a disaster for years. All I needed to do was give it a little push, and the whole empire would come crashing down. "Mr. Ethan, Miss Sullivan is in the lobby. She insists on seeing you." I ran a thumb over the face of my Patek Philippe, the corner of my mouth twitching into a smirk. A few weeks ago, I wasn't even worthy of stepping foot in her family's mansion. Now, the great heiress was waiting in my lobby. "Let her wait," I said. "I'll be down when I'm done with this report." I took a sip of coffee. The bitter taste sharpened my senses. I was going to make Robert Sullivan understand the true price of that $10 million check he'd thrown in my face. 2 hours later, Chloe was finally shown into my office. She looked haggard, her meticulous makeup failing to conceal the dark circles under her eyes. She was clutching a folder, Sullivan Corp's last-ditch plea for salvation. "Ethan, I'm begging you, please call it off. My father's health is failing. If the company goes under, it will kill him." I swiveled in my chair to face the woman who had once been so far above me. In my past life, I died for her in a dark alley, and she didn't even come to my funeral. Her begging now was a bitter irony. Ms. Sullivan, if you're going to beg, you should at least act like it. I've seen that restructuring proposal. I'm not interested. Then what do you want? I'll agree to anything, just save the company. I stood and walked over to her. She instinctively took a step back, a flash of fear in her eyes. I reached out, snatched the folder from her hands, and dropped it into the shredder. I want a 51% controlling stake in Sullivan Corp., I said, and I want your father to issue a public apology to me. That's impossible. My father would never agree to that. I settled back into my chair and lit a cigar. My eyes, seen through the haze of smoke, were cold and sharp as glass. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Ms. Sullivan, I will complete the acquisition by market close tomorrow. At that point, your family will not only have lost its company, but will also be buried under a mountain of debt. Chloe sank into a chair, completely devastated. She looked at me as if I were the devil himself, but I knew I was only claiming what was rightfully mine. Get out. You're wasting my time. Chloe staggered out of my office. As I watched her go, the last trace of pity in my heart evaporated. The game was just beginning, and the Sullivans were merely the first stepping stone of my empire. I sat in my car across the street, watching the creditors swarm the entrance of the Sullivan Corp building. Robert Sullivan was probably holed up in his office, frantically calling in favors from all his old cronies. In my past life, these were the same men who drunkenly promised to look out for me, only to be the first to pick over the scraps of the Sullivan family's collapse. Damn it, Peterson. I saved your company when you were going bankrupt, and now you want to talk market price for your shares. I listened to the desperate shouting coming through the bug I'd planted, a cold smirk on my face. Robert Sullivan still didn't get it. In his world, there were no permanent friends, only permanent interests, and I had offered Peterson triple the market rate. Since Mr. Sullivan refuses to apologize, let's turn up the heat. I ended the call and signaled my assistant to initiate Phase 2. Within 10 minutes, allegations of massive accounting fraud at Sullivan Corp were the top story on every financial news network. This was the surprise I'd been preparing. Every single data point was a precision strike against the company's weakest points. Impossible. Only the executive board had access to these ledgers. Ethan, how did you get this information? I stared up at the darkened window of the penthouse office, imagining Robert Sullivan's face contorted in despair. In my past life, I'd worked myself to the bone, even taking out loan shark money, to help him cover up these very discrepancies. This time, they were his damnation. Mr. Sullivan, I murmured to myself, we're just getting started. The stock plummeted, trading halted. Billions of Sullivan Corp's market cap vanished in less than an hour. I knew Robert Sullivan's last line of defense had just crumbled. In this world, the strong devour the weak, and he no longer had any leverage. As evening fell, a heavy rain began to pour over New York City. I stepped out of the building under an umbrella and saw her immediately, Chloe, standing in the downpour. She was soaked through, her once proud shoulders slumped in defeat. The moment she saw me, she ran forward, only to be blocked by my security detail. Ethan, please, you have to see my father. He's in the hospital, he had a heart attack. He wants to apologize to you himself. I stopped, watching her through the sheet of rain. Water streamed down her face, indistinguishable from tears. I remembered a rainy night in my past life when I ran halfway across the city to get her a pastry she'd mentioned offhand, only for her to taste it and say, "It's too sweet, throw it out." If an apology could fix everything, we wouldn't need courts, would we? Go home, Ms. Sullivan. Don't waste your time with the drama. You were never like this, she cried. You used to worry if I so much as sneezed. How did you become so heartless? Because the Ethan who cared about you died in that alley. The man standing here today only cares about one thing, profit. I walked around her and got into the waiting Rolls-Royce. I could hear Chloe's desperate sobs behind me, but I felt nothing. Her belated devotion was worthless. I'll do anything if you'll just spare my family, she screamed after me. Even marry you. Marry you, I said to myself. Ms. Sullivan, right now you aren't even qualified to be a receptionist at Apex Capital. The door closed, shutting out the storm and her voice. I watched her small, white figure recede in the rearview mirror as I poured a glass of wine. I had won this round completely and utterly. The Sullivan Corp shareholders meeting proceeded as scheduled. When I pushed open the heavy doors to the boardroom, the chatter immediately died. I walked directly to the head of the table, to the seat that had once belonged to Robert Sullivan. Now it was mine. Mr. Ethan, one of the board members began. As you can see, we've all signed over our shares. The future of the company is in your hands. These old snakes changed their allegiance in the blink of an eye. Yesterday, they were huddled with Robert Sullivan, plotting against me. Today, they were falling over themselves to curry favor. I opened the folder in front of me and looked around the table. As of today, Sullivan Corp is no more. It is now Apex Technologies. Every member of the Sullivan family has 1 hour to clear out their desks and vacate the premises. The words had barely left my mouth when a commotion erupted from the corner of the room. Chloe's cousin, a man I vaguely recognized, burst in, his face purple with rage. "Ethan, who the hell do you think you are, kicking me out? This is my family's company. You're just some lucky piece of trash. Did you not hear me?" My security team moved in, grabbing him and dragging him out of the room like a sack of potatoes. His curses echoed down the hall, but not one person at the table said a word. I turned my gaze to the end of the table, where Chloe was sitting. Her head was bowed, her hands twisted together in her lap. "Ms. Sullivan, for old time's sake, I've arranged an apartment for you. Take your father and move there. At least you won't be homeless." Chloe slowly lifted her head, her eyes vacant, like a doll's. She stood and walked out of the boardroom without saying a word. I knew that in that room, I had shattered the last remnants of her pride. Standing on the terrace, the entire New York skyline spread out before me. The fall of the Sullivans had sent shockwaves through the financial world, but I knew this was just the foundation. The real work was just beginning. "Ethan, that was a clean takedown of the Sullivan family," Mr. Sterling said at a reception later that week. "But this semiconductor plant you're trying to build, I hear you're about to have some competition. What have you heard?" I asked. Mr. Sterling gestured to a nearby table. A woman sat there, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "That's Scarlett Vance. She runs the Vance family's operations out of DC. She's poised to dominate the AI sector for the next decade, and she wants that project too. They call her the Crimson Witch for a reason. She's more ruthless than you can possibly imagine." "Good," I replied. "It's no fun playing against a weak opponent." As if feeling my gaze, Scarlett Vance turned and raised her glass to me, a challenging, appraising smile on her lips. In my past life, the Vance family hadn't made a move on the New York market for another 3 years. It seemed my rebirth had accelerated the timeline, bringing a powerful new player to the board. "Scarlett Vance, in my past life, while you were conquering the business world, I was still playing chauffeur for Chloe. This time, let's see who the real predator is." I returned her smile with a polite nod and walked away. I needed to revise my strategy. The arrival of the Vance family was an unexpected complication, but it was also an opportunity. If I could absorb their southern assets, Apex Capital would be unstoppable. After finalizing the paperwork on some strange impulse, I drove back to the rundown neighborhood I used to live in. It was still as grim and damp as I remembered, the air smelling of cheap cigarettes and garbage. Then I saw a familiar figure, struggling with a cardboard box. It was Chloe. "I bet you never expected this," she said, her voice flat. "I ended up in the same shithole you used to live in. Is this the revenge you wanted?" She leaned against the grimy wall, holding a cup of instant ramen. The heiress who once wouldn't set foot in anything less than a 5-star restaurant was now haggling over a few $100s in rent. "I never wanted revenge," I said. "I just took back what was mine. How you live your life now is none of my concern." "Ethan, if I hadn't accepted that check from my father, if things had been different, would you have loved me forever?" The question caught me off guard for a second, and then I laughed. It was a question that had haunted me in my past life, but now it just sounded pathetic. "There are no ifs, Chloe. You can't live in the past." I pulled a roll of cash from my pocket and set it on the box next to her. It wasn't pity, it was a final settlement. "This is the last thing I'll ever do for you. Stay out of my sight from now on." I turned and walked toward the luxury car waiting at the end of the alley. I could hear Chloe's muffled sobs echoing behind me. I started the engine and drove back toward the glittering heart of the city, and I never looked back. Outside the window, the clouds hung low over the New York skyline. Scarlett Vance sat across from me, not in her usual power suit, but in a deep violet dress that softened her image but did nothing to dull the predatory glint in her eyes. I focused on preparing tea, the steam rising as I poured the hot water. "Mr. Ethan," she began, "I hear you utterly destroyed the Sullivan family to secure that semiconductor project. You have excellent sources, Ms. Vance. It was a simple business acquisition. Destroyed is such a strong word." I poured a cup of tea and slid it across the table to her. In my past life, Scarlett was infamous for her ruthlessness, for using information advantages to corner her rivals. Too bad for her. Today she was up against a man who knew the next 10 years of headlines. "The Vance family is determined to win that contract," she said. "Name your price to withdraw your bid." "Ms. Vance," I replied, Do I look like I need the money? She paused, clearly not expecting such a direct refusal. She had done her homework on me. Her files probably still described me as the desperate kid who'd trade his dignity for a check. What she didn't know was that my appetite was now far, far bigger than she could imagine. Ethan, good business is about playing the long game. Making an enemy of the Vance family is not a smart move for Apex Capital. I have a character flaw, Ms. Vance. The more someone tells me I can't have something, the more I want it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Scarlett didn't touch her tea. She stood, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. She paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. Let's hope that bravado of yours lasts until the bidding next week. The door closed. I set down my cup and watched the storm clouds gathering outside. The Vance family was a problem, yes, but I knew something she didn't. Next week, a failed overseas acquisition was going to put her in a severe cash crunch. That was my ace in the hole. The hospital corridor was deathly quiet, smelling strongly of antiseptic. I pushed open the door to a private room and saw Robert Sullivan lying in bed, an oxygen tube in his nostrils. In just a few weeks, he had aged decades. He was gaunt, his hair completely white. Chloe sat by his bedside, quietly peeling an apple. "What are you doing here?" she asked without looking up. "Come to gloat. I don't have time for that. I'm here to discuss a business matter with Mr. Sullivan." Robert Sullivan's eyes fluttered open, his hazy gaze finally focusing on me. He tried to speak, his voice a dry, cracking whisper. I stood over his bed, looking down at the man who had once tried to buy me off like trash. You won," he rasped. "The company is gone. What more could you possibly want? I want the deed to the old Sullivan manufacturing plant on the outskirts of the city. In exchange, I'll cover all of your medical bills and give Chloe a respectable job." The apple fell from Chloe's hand and rolled to a stop at my feet. She stared at me, her eyes a mixture of fury and humiliation, but above all, helplessness. She knew they were in no position to refuse. "Ethan, do you have to strip us of our very last shred of dignity? Dignity is something you earn, not something you're given," I said. "Sign the papers, Robert." With a trembling hand, Robert Sullivan signed his name. I collected the documents without a second glance. I knew that beneath that derelict factory lay the path of a new subway line, destined to become the city's next major commercial hub. In my past life, the Sullivans had sold that land to the Thompsons for a pittance, completely unaware of its potential. This time, that gold mine was mine. "Report to HR at Apex Capital tomorrow," I said to Chloe. "You'll be my executive assistant. It's your only option." I left the room. Chloe didn't follow me out. I knew she would take the job. She had no other choice. The next day, Chloe stood in front of my desk, dressed in a charcoal gray business suit. She looked nervous, her knuckles white as she gripped a file. I didn't look up from the proposal I was reading. "Ms. Sullivan, make 10 copies of this report. You'll be accompanying me to a meeting with Scarlett Vance at 3 p.m. The Vance family is a major power in DC, she said hesitantly. "Are you sure you want to challenge them directly?" I put down my pen and looked at her. I could still see a flicker of her old arrogance, but it was mostly buried under a reluctant acceptance of her new reality. "Your job is to follow orders, not ask questions." That afternoon, the auction room was thick with tension. Scarlett Vance and her team sat on our left, every one of them radiating an aura of absolute confidence. I sat on the right, with only Chloe standing behind me. As soon as the bidding opened, Scarlett started with an incredibly high offer. "Well, Mr. Ethan," she said, looking at me, "are you going to match that?" "I'm not," I said, "but I would advise you to take the call you're about to get from your assistant." Scarlett frowned just as her assistant hurried into the room and whispered urgently in her ear. The color drained from Scarlett's face. I knew exactly what had just happened. 10 minutes ago, their major European acquisition had been blocked by regulators. Their capital was now frozen. "This was you," she hissed. "I simply knew the outcome ahead of time," I replied. "Ms. Vance, since you no longer have the liquid assets to compete, I'll be happy to take this project off your hands." I raised my paddle and made a bid just under her opening offer. The room was in an uproar. Scarlett stared at me with a look that could kill. Chloe stood behind me, frozen in shock. It was likely the first time she had ever witnessed such a ruthless and perfectly executed corporate maneuver. After the auction ended, I got off the elevator in the parking garage and found Scarlett leaning against the door of my car. She looked flustered, her perfect hair slightly out of place. She held an unlit cigarette in her hand. "Ethan, who the hell are you?" she demanded. "Some kid in his 20s doesn't just pull off something like this. It's impossible. Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is that you now have a massive financial hole to fill, and you need cash, fast. Her head snapped up, her eyes wary. I had just casually exposed her company's most critical vulnerability. I walked over, took the cigarette from her fingers, and tossed it in a nearby bin. The Vance family is powerful in DC, and I have no desire for an all-out war. I'll give you a $5 billion bailout. In exchange, I want a controlling interest in all of your Southern AI research labs. You're a goddamn vulture, she spat. I am, but you and I both know that no one else will touch you right now. I'm your only option. Scarlett was silent for a long time. She was a smart woman. She knew the difference between pride and survival. When she finally looked at me, her expression was a complex mix of hatred and a grudging, unfamiliar respect. Deal, she said finally, but I have one condition. I want a stake in Apex Capital. Done, I replied, but you'll be a silent partner. You get a share of the profits, but no say in my decisions. I opened the car door for Chloe. She looked from Scarlett to me, her face a mask of pure astonishment. She had always seen Scarlett Vance as an invincible titan of industry, a myth, and I had just brought that myth to its knees in less than an hour. The view of the city from the restaurant was breathtaking. I sat across the table from Chloe. She had worked incredibly hard all day, staying late without being asked, to collate all the data on the Vance laboratories. She was becoming a capable assistant, the spoiled heiress fading away. Ethan, thank you, she said quietly, for my father's medical care and for everything I saw today. Don't thank me. You earned your salary. In this world, Chloe, weakness is the only true sin. She said nothing, just stared out at the river below. I knew what she was thinking. If only she had treated me differently back then, maybe none of this would have happened. But I knew better. There are no second chances in life, only in rebirth. With the Vance Labs under my control, I now held the keys to the kingdom of artificial intelligence. The biggest boom of the next decade was now mine to command. I ordered a bottle of wine and watched the lights of the city. The Thompsons were ruined, the Sullivans were broken, and the Vances were now my partners. More had happened in the last few weeks than in the entire decade of my past life. Are you going to keep going after my family? Chloe asked. Your family is no longer relevant to me. My sights are set much higher now. I raised my glass and finished it in one go. Chloe looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, but it didn't matter anymore. I stood, straightened my suit, and prepared myself for the opening bell. My empire had only just begun to lay its foundations. Inside the laboratory, hundreds of servers hummed with latent power. This facility had once belonged to the Vance family. Now it bore the logo of Apex Technologies. I watched the data stream across the monitors, knowing I was looking at the code that would define the next decade. Chloe approached with a stack of printouts. She moved with a new efficiency, though I sometimes caught a flicker of the lost girl in her eyes. Mr. Ethan, the head of research, Dr. Peterson, would like a word. He's extremely upset about your decision to defund the legacy projects. Send him in. A moment later, an older man with a shock of white hair stormed into the room. Ethan, do you have any idea what you're doing? Funneling the entire R&D budget into neural networks is scientific suicide. Dr. Peterson, I'm not interested in dead ends. I'm interested in the fastest way forward. I walked to the whiteboard and scribbled out a series of complex equations, the core of a deep learning algorithm that wouldn't be discovered for another 3 years in my old life. The furious blush on Dr. Peterson's face vanished, replaced by stunned silence. He stared at the whiteboard, his breathing growing shallow and quick. This is impossible. How could you have conceived of this? I'm a businessman, doctor. I care about results. Follow my model. I want a working prototype in 3 months. Dr. Peterson stared at me as if I were some kind of alien, then snatched the notes and left without another word. Chloe stood by, her eyes wide with awe. She probably thought I was some kind of genius, but it was just the benefit of hindsight. With the AI division on track, I turned my attention to the next big thing, electric vehicles. In my past life, that industry had minted billionaires. Today, I was at a federal auction to secure the mining rights to the country's largest lithium deposit. The room was filled with the heavy hitters of the industry, including Scarlett Vance. She was back to her usual formidable self, chatting with a group of international investors. Mr. Ethan, she said, approaching me, still trying to master AI and now you want to get into batteries? Be careful not to bite off more than you can chew. You never know until you try, Ms. Vance. Speaking of which, have you managed to patch up that financial hole in your European division yet? Her smile tightened for a split second before she nonchalantly raised her glass. She was now both my partner and my most dangerous rival, and we existed in a state of delicate equilibrium. And now, the auctioneer announced, the exclusive development rights for the Nevada lithium deposit go to Apex Capital. The room exploded with noise. Every eye was on me. Scarlett's wine glass trembled in her hand as she stared at me in disbelief. She had formed a consortium with 3 other major players to block me out, but she had no idea I'd already cut a deal directly with the state government, promising local investment in exchange for the rights. "When were you in Nevada? I had people tracking your every move," she hissed. "Ms. Vance, you were watching my movements, but you should have been watching my intentions." I walked to the stage with Chloe right behind me. She was wearing a sharp pantsuit and expertly fended off the reporters trying to close in. I looked out at the sea of calculating faces in the audience and thought to myself, my foundation is now unshakable. With the lithium rights secured, I returned to Aspen to tie up one last loose end. The old Sullivan estate had been seized by the government. Robert Sullivan, under investigation for fraud and a flight risk, was confined to the guest cottage on the property. I pushed the door open, a smell of damp and decay greeting me. Robert Sullivan sat in a wheelchair, staring out the window with vacant eyes. "So you came," he said, "here to see if I'm dead yet?" "I came to collect the things I once gave Chloe." I pointed to a small, rusted metal box in the corner. It contained every gift I had ever bought her in my past life, each one purchased by skipping meals and working extra hours. They were worthless trinkets, monuments to my own stupidity. "Ethan, I kept them all," Chloe said from the doorway. "I never threw them out." "It doesn't matter anymore," I said, turning to her father. "By the way, Mr. Sullivan, I've settled your outstanding bank loans." Robert Sullivan's head snapped toward me, a brief flash of hope in his eyes before it died. He knew this wasn't an act of charity. It was me severing our final connection. "From this day forward, you have nothing to do with my company. Chloe will remain employed in New York, and her salary will be more than enough to support you." I picked up the heavy metal box and walked out of the house without a backward glance. Chloe followed me to the door, looking like she wanted to speak, but she remained silent. I tossed the box into a dumpster on the street and watched as a garbage truck came and hauled it away. In that moment, I felt a final chain break inside me. It was 3 in the morning, and I was still in my office, reading through a series of negative press articles my team had managed to intercept before publication. Brad Thompson might be in prison, but his family's allies were still out for blood. They'd partnered with some tabloids, envious of Apex Capital's success, to spread rumors about my funding being illegitimate. "Sir," my head of PR said over the phone, "our legal team has issued cease and desist letters, but the rumors are spreading. They're accusing you of running a Ponzi scheme." "A Ponzi scheme?" I scoffed. "They'll have to do better than that." I lit a cigarette and stared down at the silent streets below. In my past life, rumors like these had cost me my reputation and my job. But this time, I held all the cards. Release our complete, audited financial records and tax statements to the SEC, and get Mr. Sterling on the line. Tell him we're issuing a joint press release tomorrow morning. "Yes, sir. Right away." Chloe, who had been standing by, spoke up. "Ethan, you should get some rest. You haven't slept in 2 days." I saw the genuine concern in her eyes and felt something stir within me, a feeling I quickly crushed. I didn't need her concern. I needed her loyalty. "Finish your work and go home. When the market opens tomorrow, I'm going to bankrupt every single person responsible for this. No one on Wall Street would be sleeping tonight." I watched the pre-market futures, a patient hunter waiting for his prey. The cowards hiding in the shadows had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't just see their current moves. I saw every move they would make in the future. By noon the next day, the storm had passed. The publications that ran the stories were facing lawsuits that would bankrupt them. And Apex Capital stock, bolstered by a glowing endorsement from Sterling's conglomerate, was up 30%. I stood on the terrace, the whole of New York sprawling behind me. Scarlett Vance approached, heels clicking, a new partnership agreement in her hand. "Ethan, you're nothing like a man in his 20s. Sometimes I think you're an ancient devil in a young man's body." "Is that a compliment or an insult, Ms. Vance?" She came to stand beside me, looking out over the water. "The Southern labs are fully integrated. Our first proprietary AI chip is ready for mass production." This was it. The moment I transitioned from a successful investor to a true industry titan. "There are people in DC who are taking notice of you," she warned. "My family's influence can shield you for a time, but not forever. You need an escape plan." "I don't need an escape plan," I said. "Every step I take forward creates its own path." Just then, Chloe came over and gently draped a jacket over my shoulders. She had settled into her role, quiet, efficient, all traces of the spoiled heiress gone. I looked out at the city lights, knowing the real game was only just beginning. Washington, D.C. In my past life, I wouldn't have even been allowed in the same room as the people there. This time, I would make them all learn my name. I turned and walked back into my office, with Scarlett on one side and Chloe on the other. In that moment, I felt a power I had never known. I was no longer the poor kid who could be bought and dismissed. Outside the jet's window, clouds streamed past as we flew at 30,000 feet, destination, Washington, D.C. I leaned back in the plush leather seat, studying the dossier Scarlett had prepared on the key players in D.C. Chloe sat across from me, meticulously reviewing our schedule for our arrival. Her professionalism was now on par with any top executive assistant in the world. Mr. Ethan, the car is confirmed. However, we've received a message from Carter Prescott. He's requested your presence at a charity gala tonight. The Prescott family. They controlled nearly half of the tech hardware sector on the East Coast. In my past life, their empire would crumble from a liquidity crisis in 2 years. But for now, they were still titans. An invitation from Carter Prescott at this exact moment was a clear power play, a warning to the new guy in town. Scarlett warned us they play dirty, Chloe said. Should I decline? Why would I decline? He's gone to all the trouble of setting the stage. It would be rude not to show up for the performance. The plane touched down smoothly at Dulles. As I stepped onto the tarmac, the crisp, cold DC air hit me. This wasn't the gentle climate of Aspen or the vibrant energy of New York. This was the heart of American power. I straightened my tie and walked toward the waiting black Cadillac. In my past life, I'd delivered pizzas in this city. This time, I would make the city itself take notice of me. The car moved smoothly through the streets. Watching the historic brick buildings and monuments pass by, I felt a deep sense of calm. The Prescotts, the DC establishment, it didn't matter. To a man who knew the next 10 years, they were all dinosaurs, relics of a bygone era. The country club was a sea of luxury cars. A hostess led me inside. As I entered the ballroom, the conversations died down, and dozens of pairs of eyes turned to appraise me. Carter Prescott stood in the center of a circle of admirers, swirling a glass of champagne, a look of inherited arrogance etched on his face. Well, so this is the famous Ethan, the man making all that noise in New York. You don't look so special to me, he said. His cronies laughed on cue. Chloe, standing behind me, tensed for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. I ignored Carter's taunt, walked over to an empty couch and sat down. Monsters have 3 heads and 6 arms, Mr. Prescott. I'm just a simple man who enjoys making money. Making money? He sneered. The money in this town isn't for outsiders. I hear you want a piece of the semiconductor market. My advice? Go back to New York before you lose your shirt. He slammed his glass down on the coffee table, splashing wine. I'd seen this kind of petty intimidation tactic 1,000 times in my past life. I calmly took out a handkerchief, wiped my hands, and met his gaze. Mr. Prescott, instead of worrying about my shirt, you should be worrying about that shipment of rare earth minerals your family has tied up in customs in Southeast Asia. If I'm not mistaken, your entire quarterly production depends on it. Correct. The color drained from Carter's face. That shipment was a closely guarded secret. There was no way an outsider could know. He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. It's been a lovely party, but I'm afraid I don't care for the wine, I said, standing up. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving a stunned silence behind me. Chloe followed, looking at me as if she'd never seen me before. She was probably wondering just how many aces I had hidden up my sleeve. The moment we got back to the hotel, I gave my first order. I knew exactly where the Prescott family's jugular was. In my past life, their downfall began with an internal leak from a disgruntled accountant. And right now, that same accountant was in deep with a loan shark, about to get a visit from Carter's thugs. Find me an accountant named Frank Miller. He's got a gambling problem. Find him, bring him to me, and tell him I'll pay off his debts, twice over. Chloe took down the instructions without batting an eye. She was used to my seemingly random commands by now. She no longer asked why. She just made sure it got done perfectly. An hour later, a terrified Frank Miller was standing in my suite. Mr. Ethan, you have to help me. Prescott is going to kill me. He won't touch you, I said. Give me the unedited version of the Prescott family's books, and I'll put you on a plane out of the country tonight. Miller hesitated for all of 3 seconds before agreeing. When faced with death, loyalty becomes a cheap commodity. Once I had the data, I didn't leak it. I called Scarlett Vance. You work fast, she said. The Prescotts have barely made their first move, and you've already got them by the throat. Get your capital ready, Scarlett. I told her. When the market opens tomorrow, we're going to carve up their entire empire. I hung up and went to the window. The DC skyline was beautiful, but tonight it felt predatory. I knew that by this time tomorrow, the Prescott family would be a footnote in history, and the name Apex Capital would be on everyone's lips in this city. Get some sleep, I told Chloe. We have a busy day of reaping tomorrow. She nodded, and as she looked at my back, I saw a new light in her eyes. Total unwavering devotion. I knew then that she was mine, completely. Within 30 minutes of the opening bell, all three of the Prescott's publicly traded companies had their stocks suspended after hitting the circuit breaker. The DC power brokers who had been watching from the sidelines were suddenly paying very close attention. They stared at the sea of red on the trading floor screens, their faces masks of disbelief. What's happening? Is someone shorting the Prescotts? Who has the balls to do that? I sat in a private suite overlooking the trading floor, a bank of monitors in front of me. Scarlett was beside me, her fingers flying across a keyboard, executing a series of trades that targeted the Prescott's vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Ethan, this data is a kill shot, Scarlett exclaimed. Their credit lines are frozen. They're finished. This is just the down payment, I said. Yesterday, Carter Prescott told me I wasn't fit to make money in his city. Today, I'm going to show him how quickly it can be lost. Just then, the door to our suite burst open and Carter Prescott stormed in. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie was askew, and the arrogant swagger of the previous night was gone. He lunged for me, but my security team had him pinned to the floor in an instant. Ethan, you're insane, he screamed from the floor. You're committing suicide. The establishment in this town will bury you. Mr. Prescott, the establishment follows strength, and you, as of this morning, have none. I gestured for my men to remove him. Chloe watched as the once untouchable Carter Prescott was dragged out like a common drunk, and she let out a small sigh. The scene, I knew, was reminding her of her own family's fall. No time for nostalgia, I said. Notify our finance team. It's time to start acquiring their core assets. I walked out of the building into the bright, glaring sun. The fall of the Prescotts was just the beginning. I had just thrown a boulder into the placid pond of DC politics and finance. A week after the Prescott family's collapse, Apex Capital officially opened its Washington, D.C. office. At the launch party, the same DC elites who had sneered at me a week before were now lining up, smiling, to hand me their business cards. In this town, profit was the only true currency. Mr. Ethan, such a pleasure. We look forward to working with you here in DC, they'd say. Likewise, I'd reply, there's plenty of money to be made. I navigated the sea of false smiles and empty pleasantries, feeling nothing. Chloe, elegant in a black evening gown, moved through the crowd at my side, expertly managing the flow of conversation and introductions. She had fully adapted to this new, high-stakes life. Congratulations, Ethan, Scarlett said, joining us. You're the talk of the town, the man with the Midas touch. You did quite well for yourself, too, I replied. I couldn't have moved so quickly without your capital. Scarlett smiled, and I saw a new, calculating depth in her gaze. We were no longer just partners. Our interests were now deeply intertwined. I looked out at the crowd and thought back to the day this all started. That $10 million check. How absurd it seemed now. Robert Sullivan, are you watching? You tried to buy my future for a pittance, and in doing so, you gave me the capital to buy my way into the heart of this city. After the party, I stood on the rooftop terrace, looking out at the glittering lights of Washington, D.C. I knew my empire was taking shape, but this was only the foundation. My goal was to build a global conglomerate, an empire that would bear my name. Mr. Ethan, your flight back to New York is booked for tomorrow morning, Chloe informed me. Good, I said. Next, we go after the final piece of the puzzle. I turned back toward my desk, the setting sun casting my long shadow across the room. In this life, I would be a king. Outside the window, the Hudson River flowed on, relentless and powerful. I returned from DC and dove straight into planning our global expansion. Chloe stood behind me, expertly organizing the files for our next international acquisition. The spoiled heiress was gone, replaced by a woman with a calm and steady gaze, forged in the crucible of corporate warfare. Mr. Ethan, the big tech firms in Silicon Valley are getting nervous. They've sent a joint offer to buy out our foundational AI algorithm. A buyout? I laughed. They're terrified we're about to make them obsolete. Tell them Apex doesn't sell its technology. We sell finished products. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes on the world map that covered one wall. In my past life, these same companies had used their technological superiority to exploit the market for a decade. This time, I was going to show them what it felt like to be on the other side. There's one more thing, Chloe said hesitantly. My father was discharged yesterday. Before he moves back home, he wants to cook a meal for you, to thank you. That won't be necessary, Ms. Sullivan. As I've said, our relationship is professional. Arrange a comfortable retirement condo for him in Aspen. Bill it to my personal account. Chloe froze. She lowered her head, and I could hear the catch in her voice. I knew she was still holding on, but that door in my heart had been welded shut from the moment my new life began. Go on, get back to work. The meeting with Scarlett this afternoon is critical. I need you focused. She took a deep breath, subtly wiped her eyes, and her professional mask was back in place. I watched her walk away, my own resolve hardening. In this life, I wasn't a pawn in anyone's game. I was the one controlling the board. After a long night at the office, I took a walk along the river. The cool wind helped to clear my head. Chloe caught up to me, holding out my coat. She looked at me, and I could see years of pent-up emotion in her eyes, a dam about to break. Ethan, she began, her voice trembling, if I hadn't taken my father's money, if you were still the same person you were back then, would you still love me, even a little? I stopped walking and turned to face her. The lights from the riverbank made her face look pale and drawn. It was the same question I had asked myself 1,000 times in my past life. Now it was her turn to ask me. Chloe, the most worthless thing in this world is regret. I know I was wrong, she sobbed. I regret it every day. Watching you build this empire, I realized I threw away the most valuable thing I ever had. You only regret it because of who I am now. If I were still that pathetic boy chasing you in the rain, you would feel nothing but annoyance. I didn't take the coat from her, and it slipped from her fingers to the pavement. I looked out at the dark water, feeling a profound sense of liberation. Miss Sullivan, your position at my company is a reward for your competence and hard work. If you wish to discuss personal matters, you can submit your resignation in the morning. Chloe sank onto a nearby bench, her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. I didn't look back. I walked to my car. In that moment, the last ghost of the pathetic man I used to be was finally laid to rest. On the eve of our global product launch, Scarlett Vance walked into my office, flanked by a team of lawyers. She was holding a contract, and her expression was deadly serious. The she-wolf was finally showing her teeth. Ethan, she said, the Vance family is exercising its option for a follow-on investment. We're increasing our stake in Apex Technologies to 40%. Ms. Vance, I replied coolly, are you attempting a hostile takeover? Scarlett leaned across my desk, her power and presence filling the room. The Vance family, it was clear, was no longer content to be a junior partner. They wanted control of my AI empire. This comes from the patriarch of the family himself. If you refuse, our entire Southern research and supply chain network will shut down tomorrow. Scarlett, I said, leaning back in my chair, did you really think I'd let you in the door without having an ace up my sleeve? I pulled up a hidden network schematic on my monitor. As Scarlett looked at the screen, her face went pale. She was looking at the location of our primary server farm, housing the keys to all our core algorithms. Deep underground, beneath that old factory I'd acquired from the Sullivans. Feel free to pull your funding, Scarlett, but without access to my core servers, your labs are nothing but expensive paperweights. She stared at me for a long, silent moment, and then she began to laugh, a dry, self-mocking sound. She retracted the contract and smoothed her hair. Ethan, you truly are insane. It seems I have no choice but to remain your partner. The smart choice, I said. A pleasure, as always, Ms. Vance. As she walked out, I wiped a bead of cold sweat from my brow. It had been a hell of a gamble, but I'd won. Because I didn't just know the future of technology. I knew the future of human greed. Spotlights converged on the stage, where I stood before an audience of the world's most powerful political and business leaders. In the wings, Chloe stood with her fists clenched. I straightened my tie and, to the sound of thunderous applause, stepped up to the podium. Today, I began. We redefine the future. I clicked the remote, and on the screen behind me, the world's first true artificial general intelligence came to life. The auditorium was silent for a heartbeat, and then erupted. I knew, in that moment, that the name Ethan would be written into the history books. My God, someone whispered nearby. This is 2 decades ahead of anything we've ever seen. I looked out at the ecstatic faces in the crowd and felt a strange sense of calm. In my past life, I died anonymously in a filthy alley. Now, the entire world was listening to me speak. Sir, Chloe said into my earpiece, her voice thick with emotion, we did it. This is only the beginning, I replied. Chloe, Tell the legal department to begin drafting the new global standards for AI development. Scarlett came up onto the stage and gave me a firm, congratulatory hug. The Vance family concedes, she whispered in my ear. I pushed open the doors to leave the auditorium and was met by a sky full of stars and a sea of flashing cameras. I had finally reached the summit. I hadn't done it for love or for dignity. I had done it for the single moment, to stand on the peak and look down on all the other mountains. I declined all interviews and went up to the roof. The wind was fierce, whipping my hair, but my mind had never been clearer. I finally understood. The point of this second life wasn't revenge. It was the power to choose my own destiny. A year later, I found myself back in Aspen. The town hadn't changed, though the names Sullivan and Thompson were now just cautionary tales told over drinks. I stood before an unmarked grave, wearing a black coat and holding a small bouquet of white daisies. It was the pauper's grave where they had buried my body in my past life. I lived well for you, I said quietly, and I got your revenge. You can rest now. I set the flowers down and turned to see Chloe standing a few yards away. She had quit her job and was now teaching at a local elementary school. A deep sense of peace had settled over her, the old ambition and pride gone from her eyes. Mr. Ethan, she said with a small smile. It's been a while. Ms. Sullivan, I replied. We made small talk for a minute, like distant acquaintances, and then we walked past each other. There was no drama, no lingering tension, only the quiet peace of a story that had finally, truly ended. My phone rang. It was Scarlett. She informed me that Apex Capital had just crossed the $1 trillion valuation mark. So, Mr. Trillionaire, she said, her voice a low purr, what's your next move? I'm going to find somewhere no one knows my name and get a good night's sleep, I said honestly. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in a tone I'd never heard from her before, she said, Ethan, it's time for Apex and the Vance conglomerate to engage in a final, ultimate merger. I froze, instantly understanding her meaning. What are the terms? I asked, my voice pure business by reflex. The terms are a joint partnership, you and I, ruling this empire together. Her voice was filled with absolute certainty. In this world, Ethan, only a queen is fit to share a king's throne. I ended the call and looked out at the vast night sky. After a long moment, a genuine laugh escaped my lips. In this life, I had sworn to love no one, only money. But perhaps, I could make an exception for the one queen who could stand beside me and survey our kingdom. I picked up my keys and started the car. My destination was no longer some quiet retreat. It was Washington, D.C. Our empire was just beginning.